in March of 1913 for like several days. Literally, it rained cats and dogs.
Literally?
Literally.
This is the Exploring the National Parks podcast with Dirt in My Shoes. My name is Ash, and I'm a former park ranger and the founder of Dirt in My Shoes. I think that the parks are best seen from the trail, and I'm here to make national park trip planning easy.
And I'm John. I carry the kids on the trails, I tell stories, and notice all the things that Ash doesn't care about much, like trees.
Join us as we show you around America's spectacular national parks.
We're sharing our favorite places, fun facts, adventures, and misadventures.
And we'll even throw in a little trip planning.
Let's start exploring. I have been on a kick lately that Ash is not really in favor of and does not understand at all.
I feel like that applies to a lot of things.
I have been watching a lot of 90s and early 2000s Kevin Sorbo television shows, such as Hercules, the whatever journeys, the awesome journeys or whatever, and Andromeda.
I don't know how you can watch that. It's like, I watch it for 30 seconds and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so painful.
Ash just like, because sometimes when we eat dinner, we turn on Hercules so that the boys can watch Hercules. And I'm like, this is good for building character. And then when night comes around and I'm watching Andromeda, Ash walks through the door and she's just like, is out as fast as she can be. She does not understand or appreciate Andromeda.
I think it's pretty clear from this podcast, like who watches all of the shows and movies and stuff like that. I'm not a TV watcher. I haven't been for a long time.
Right.
I don't see the appeal anyway. I don't know. I read. I'm a reader. And so John will be in the other room binging on Netflix and I'll be reading my books. And that's pretty much how our evenings go and have gone for the past couple of years. So.
Yep. And if it's a scary show, I have to turn it really down low and turn on the captions so that Ash doesn't have nightmares.
Yeah, I have nightmares just from hearing the background noise of a scarier show. So yes. I don't know. That's why John has so many references and I do not. I have to default to the more nerdy trip planning stuff because I don't watch TV.
Couldn't you reference your books?
No. No, I don't think so.
Maybe we won't go into why. But that's pretty darn funny. But
yep.
if you know the Kevin Sorbo meme when he's from like or when he's Hercules, one of the later seasons, he just like realizes he's not where he wants to be and he just yells at the heavens, "Disappointed!" That's how I feel every time I invite Ash to watch something with me. Disappointed.
You'll get over it. Speaking of not this, today we're talking about Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Ohio. Again.
Yes.
We've been hitting some smaller national parks on the podcast these past few months. I think that it's okay to talk about all the big parks because a lot of people go to the big parks and the popular parks.
Right.
But I also think it's really cool to talk about some of these parks that a lot of people don't know anything about.
Right.
So that's why we're kind of venturing into some of these smaller parks that are a little bit more obscure that maybe you've never heard of. And so if you want a good intro to Cuyahoga Valley, we did the exploring episode a few weeks back. Today is the Cuyahoga Valley Fun Facts episode.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about this. This place was really interesting. But what's really kind of unique about Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and it's probably becoming less unique as more national parks get added that are a little bit more non-traditional, but this park really, it's more of a blend between National Historic Site and National Park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it's an urban park.
Right.
So it's right in between the cities of Cleveland and Akron up there in Ohio. And it feels different because it's close to such big population centers.
Right.
And yeah, I will say I don't hate that they made it a national park.
Mhm.
Not like Gateway Arch, where it's just like, "Ugh, why did you do that?"
Ash has very strong feelings about that.
I don't mind. In fact, I really love when parks have that historic site feeling because I love the historic sites. I think they're really cool.
Yeah.
When you can go in and learn about the history or the people or the infrastructure, all of that.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. Cuyahoga Valley, I feel like it has enough nature, like beautiful nature, that it's okay that it's a national park.
Right.
I just want the National Park Service to know that I'm okay with this one.
Stamped, Ash approved.
Exactly. That's fine with me.
That's so funny. Yeah. As you explore different national parks, like as you go to the Great Smokies or as you visit, some of these pioneer era national parks with some settlements and things like that, a lot of them have really interesting things, but they're usually small parts of a bigger national park.
Mm-hmm.
This one is a little bit flip-flopped, where it has some really beautiful nature, but a lot of the main focus is on the cultural heritage that is here in the park. And so we'll get to a lot of that today. We'll
Okay.
spend a lot of time on that, but we'll start where a lot of our Fun Facts episodes start, which is kind of where did this place come from and why is it so special and cool? What's interesting is while I was getting ready for this episode, I feel like I identified the patroness of Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And for you non-magical folk, for the muggles out there.
John thinks I'm a muggle. I'm not, but I don't know what my Patronus is.
Yeah, that's
We haven't figured out mine.
Ash would easily be in Ravenclaw House.
Really?
Yeah, you would be in Ravenclaw House.
No, last time we had this discussion, you told me I was for sure Slytherin.
No, I think that you're probably more Ravenclaw. You're really smart.
I am really smart.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
I do have a hint of mischief and evil, though.
yes, that is very apparent at different times. No,
We're not going to go into examples. But okay, what is Cuyahoga Valley's Patronus?
The Patronus is a dove.
Okay.
And the reason that I think that, if I was to wax poetic for a moment, it's because I think that like the true spirit of Cuyahoga Valley is like the embodiment of peace, basically.
Okay.
It's a really peaceful place.
Mm-hmm.
As you visit, there's trails and things that take you all the way through it. But really, a lot of the cultural heritage of the place, and as you just kind of sit on some of the benches or enjoying some of the natural aspects of it, you're just like, wow, this is just so beautiful and peaceful here. And I think that as I was learning, especially kind of going through the geology, some of the natural history of the place, less the cultural history, that really stuck out to me. Let's jump right into that, and I will try to prove my point.
Okay, I'm
Why
ready.
Cuyahoga Valley's Patronus is a dove. As I was studying the geology of Cuyahoga Valley, it felt kind of like whenever we go to a fancier restaurant, Ash, where the waiter kind of puts the plate down in front of me, and then I look at it, and then I look at you, and despite the price tag, I realize that when we get home, I'm going to have a bowl of cereal.
John hates fancy food because he is definitely a quantity over quality type of person when it comes to his food.
Yes.
I've learned that over the years. The one question he always asks waiters and waitresses before he orders is, which of these is bigger?
Exactly. When I was first kind of looking at the geology of Cuyahoga Valley and like the natural history of this park, I was like, is this it? Kind of a situation.
Mhm.
I was like looking at it, I was like, there's got to be more. And so I kept digging and I kept digging and I realized, no, this is it. And this is why it's actually super interesting. But it also inspired within me kind of an epiphany. If you've ever seen the movie Hook, after Hook kidnaps Peter Pan's kids and everything like that, Hook is a little disappointed because Peter Pan didn't come back ready to fight. And so he's sitting in the bottom of his boat and Shmi says, Captain, I've just had an apostrophe. And Captain Hook's like, I think you mean an epiphany. Lightning has just struck my brain. And so as I was looking at the history, the geologic history of this place, lightning struck my brain, and
You
I was
had
like,
an apostrophe.
I just had an apostrophe. Exactly. It was just so funny. This is what my realization was. So there are a few ways that layers of earth can be laid down. Okay. Wind can blow sand places where it accumulates. Rivers can take sediments and drop them. The oceans can kind of do the same thing. Glaciers can push or pick up sediments and drop them into places. And volcanoes, lava, can basically create new layers of earth. Okay. But layers of rock don't just form. Sand and rock and sediments actually have to build up to create new layers of rock. And I know that's super basic, but the question is, what happens if there's no sediments laid down? This is literally what happened in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Fun fact number 1 is that all of the bedrock layers in Cuyahoga Valley National Park and Ohio more broadly are more than 245 million years old. So let me put that in a different way. With the exception of the recent ice age, we have no record of anything happening in Cuyahoga Valley National Park for the last 245 million years.
Really?
Yes, exactly. So like, what if there's no sediments being laid down? And what if there's like no major erosional forces taking place?
I didn't know that happened anywhere. I thought everything was always changing.
Right. Which is the beauty of Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Interesting.
Which is why it's so peaceful. It's like so unchanging. It's actually almost ridiculous that I'm saying this, because that was why I had this lightning strike apostrophe. I couldn't believe that literally almost nothing would happen.
So none of the forces that are churning and adding chaos really are happening here. I can see that. That's interesting. Because it's like, I mean, I feel like all of our fun facts episode is always like, and then this happens, and then this, lifts up, and this falls apart, and earthquakes, and mayhem, and
Yeah.
I feel like it's always like that. And so that's pretty cool, actually, that it's like, this is just what's here.
Right. Exactly. It just makes you feel like this is a place I want to pull up my rocking chair and sit on my porch for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
It's actually really unique, but it also creates a massive gap in the geological record. It's probably the largest geological historical gap of any place that we've ever done before in the fun facts. 250 million years where we don't have anything. We don't have plants. We don't have plant fossils. We don't have animal or dinosaur fossils. We don't even have rock layers to kind of tell us what was going on.
Well, where are they?
They just never formed. They never existed.
Okay.
And so for rock layers, they form at a specific time. And that's why this epiphany was so important to me. It's like, that's why I've never wanted a shallow sea more in my whole life.
Yeah. Apparently, Ohio wasn't part of the shallow sea.
Exactly.
That we always talk about out here west.
250 million years ago was the last time that Ohio was below sea level.
Interesting.
And that's when that last layer of rock basically formed. And so dinosaurs, honestly, it's crazy to me. Dinosaurs, not only just specific dinosaurs are absent from the record here. All dinosaurs from beginning to end, nothing.
Weird.
It is super weird. And the Department of Natural Resources for Ohio has got this really funny statement. They have all these, starting at 250 million years, they have all these different eras that they kind of have little bits of information on and paragraphs on stuff like that. For 250 million years to present, it has 2 sentences. The gist of it is, nothing was deposited that we know of, and weathering erosion happened. Which basically means that it rained and the wind blew for 245 million years. And then it says, dinosaurs probably roamed here.
Yeah. We're not sure. We have no record. Interesting. So I'm thinking of my favorite trail in Cuyahoga Valley, the Ledges Trail.
Right.
And the reason I love that trail is because the rocks are so cool.
Yeah. There's
so
kind of
is that just, that's the 250 million layer?
I believe that one specifically is the Sharon conglomerate. And so it's like
look at you just pulling that out.
And so that one was one of the last layers to form. But what's really unique, and as you walk around the Ledges Trail, you'll notice that in a lot of places, it almost looks pockmarked, or it's kind of got a honeycomb look to it. Because what a conglomerate is means that it's not uniform in like what it's made out of. And so it has lots of different kinds of sand and rock and everything like that. But one of the cool things about it is it has tons of white quartz. And so really beautiful white stone quartz. But the reason it has that honeycomb is because as it weathers, those little pieces of white quartz and the larger pebbles, they fall out. And then you have all of these little holes all throughout the Ledges Trail where it's just really...
I've never noticed that. I'll have to notice that next time we go.
So that's really cool. But honestly, to me, it was kind of annoying the fact that I couldn't find more information on that giant block of time. I just kept feeling like I was being pranked.
We're just handing you a tiny piece of tuna on your plate. The fancy tuna, not the canned.
Okay, I was wondering.
Do you know what I mean? Like the one bite of fish surrounded by leaves.
This is really the meatloaf that I paid for? This quarter-sized...
We have had that experience. I should say, you never order tuna. You do order meatloaf. I remember we were at Glacier. You were so sad because they gave you just this tiny piece of meatloaf for like $50.
I was thinking to myself, it's okay. I don't need to eat this. I'll just suck on my thumb. I'll get more nutrition from that. Oh my gosh. Okay, so back to my Patronus idea. This place is just so peaceful. Literally, like nothing's building up. Nothing's really wearing away. And this place is just constant. It's a constant in a world of chaos. And so that's why I think the Patronus of Cuyahoga Valley National Park that will drive all the Dementors away is a dove, the symbol of peace.
Nice.
I just love that. Now, I will say, at the end of that 245 million years, there was an ice age that did have a pretty big impact on the area, but not necessarily Ohio and Cuyahoga Valley. This giant ice sheet formed over northern North America.
This is the one we talked about in Great Smoky Mountains Fun Facts, right?
Correct.
The one that went all the way, pushed all the wildlife out of Ohio.
Yeah.
Probably out of anywhere up there and pushed it down to Great Smoky Mountains.
Correct.
Okay.
It's also the same ice sheets that we talked about recently when we did Olympic, and the same ice sheet that extended all the way to Acadia as well.
Okay.
And so a giant continental ice sheet. Now, this giant continental ice sheet was strong enough, it carved out the Great Lakes. So huge effect on the area. Massive geological impact. But at least in Ohio, the impact was kind of negligible because the ice sheet wasn't thick enough over Ohio to actually carve anything out. And the reason we know that, and the reason that we know that all of that 250 million year record wasn't just wiped away by these giant glaciers, is because the parts of Ohio that didn't have glaciers have the same historical geological record as the parts that did.
Crazy, because the Great Lakes are right there.
I know.
So how is there not enough ice off for Ohio?
Well, there is a continental divide in Ohio that was actually really important for everything. And so it's a north-south divide between like the Great Lakes or like the Gulf of Mexico. And so the elevation does go up a little bit towards the center of Ohio, which probably pushed back a little bit on these ice sheets. Not to mention the temperature was higher the lower and further south you get.
Sure. That's funny to me, though.
I know,
like,
it does seem kind of crazy.
What I'm picturing is like how you make your peanut butter sandwiches with just a very thin layer of peanut butter on your bread. And it's just like, no, you gotta, or like the edges, you never get the edges. It's like Ohio was an edge, but it was in the middle. It doesn't make sense.
I know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It was really surprising to me. The Great Lakes had a huge impact just north of Cuyahoga Valley National Park by carving out Lake Erie and all the other Great Lakes. But honestly, it really didn't do much to the rest of Ohio.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, we're going to move kind of away from the geology a little bit. We're not even going to spend that much time on like the plants and everything like that. The forests there are absolutely gorgeous. And honestly, one of the best aspects of visiting Cuyahoga Valley, I love visiting in the fall because the trees, the colors just pop and they're incredible. I will say that the National Park Service has a pretty funny way of describing the forests.
I love what they have on the National Park Service site.
I love just like reading something and realizing that's odd the way that you put that. And so like I was kind of reading through some of the way that they describe the different kinds of forests. And it sounds like we're at like the Northern Ohio HOA meeting or something like that in Cleveland, because the way that they describe all the different forests is like the Oak Hickory Association is the most widespread. And other
really?
It just sounds like a whole bunch of different HOAs, homeowners associations. The others include maple and oak, oak beech, maple, sycamore, pine spruce, and of course, the hemlock beech associations.
Of course.
Yes. And so it just made me laugh, but there's tons. There's so many beautiful trees and different kinds of little ecosystems spread throughout. There's even some sections of Cuyahoga Valley that have like a very specific hemlock kind of ecosystem that's because it's a little bit cooler. And you would normally only find that in more northern locations. But the forests are beautiful here, but I'm not going to spend much time on them because I really want to get to some of the cultural heritage of the area that we've talked about. And in the Exploring Cuyahoga Valley episode, we covered this a little bit. There's two really main aspects to the cultural heritage here. What they are is the environmental movement, but also the settling of the West, basically. Those two aspects of Cuyahoga's cultural heritage are just incredible. And so I really want to dive into that. And so we'll start in the 1700s because after the Revolutionary War, honestly, the population of the coastal cities and everything was booming. And if you talk to some historians, they'll tell you it was almost destined that America was going to become independent from England because there was no way that they could send as many soldiers as they needed to combat our growing population. But where was this population going to live? And the economy was so agrarian and people were just seeing there's free land out west. Let's go out west, right? But the problem is it was so rugged. And people were coming to Ohio as early as like the late 1780s, 1790s. People were making their way out here. And then for the next 100 years or so, wave after wave of settlers kept pushing the frontier further and further west. The edges of civilization were pushed from the coast deeper into the continent, from Virginia to West Virginia, from New York City to Buffalo, Philadelphia to Western Pennsylvania, and then eventually from Pennsylvania to like Ohio, from Ohio to Missouri, and then we had the gold rushes, which took people all the way out to the West Coast, to California. But from our perspective, it almost seems like all of this was a given that it would happen, that America was destined to span from coast to coast. But in reality, to the settlers that were living in that time, nothing was for certain. All they were doing was taking advantage of opportunities that were available to them. And the mountains that we see now in northern New York, like the Adirondacks, or all throughout the Appalachian Mountains, these were huge barriers to life and to the connectivity of the economy. We look at them with fondness because they're so beautiful, but people back then looked at them with foreboding because they were such a challenge to get through. And so the economy of America at this time was actually really dependent on imports from Europe. It was actually easier to get grain and other things from Europe than it was to get them from Western New York or to get them from Ohio. We were spending so much money getting things from Europe, and all the farmers and settlers that came out to Ohio, they were barely struggling to be self-sufficient. Even if they did make a surplus, it would take a month basically for them to get to a place where they could sell their own goods. And then the price that they were getting really wasn't worth it. And so a lot of the people in the US at the time were thinking, okay, how can we fix this problem? How can we connect our frontier to the main area of our country. How can we connect this economy? And so they came up with a really audacious idea. The technology at the time that was doing this successfully was boats. That was how almost everything was traveling by. If you wanted a good or a product, odds are it probably came by boat. And so they were thinking in terms of the technology of the day. How can we somehow connect the frontier with what we have now? The problem was clear, and the solution that they came up with honestly just blows my mind. They decided they were going to create man-made waterways, basically man-made rivers from the East Coast all the way inland so that all the people that lived there could sell their goods and have easy access and transportation back to the main cities. And it just blows my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the first idea was the Erie Canal, and they did that in western New York. That connected Buffalo, so Lake Erie, the city was Buffalo, and it connected it all the way to the Hudson River. And through the Hudson River, they could access the Atlantic Ocean. That started in 1817. It completed in 1825, and almost immediately, people were like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And New York was just booming, and so much was going on that Ohio got canal fever. The Erie Canal opened in 1825. Before the end of the year, there were already plans set in motion and construction started on what would become their version of the Erie Canal. And they called it the Ohio and Erie Canal.
I think that name is so funny. I was like, we couldn't come up with something else.
I know. It's such a terrible name now for us, but back then it made sense because the plan was to connect the Ohio River to the Lake Erie.
Okay.
And actually, there was another canal system that they developed further west in Ohio called the Miami and Erie Canal.
Okay. So beginning and end.
Exactly.
I gotcha.
It makes sense, but I feel like if someone was like to walk into the visitor, I bet this happens all the time when they walk into the visitor center or something in Cuyahoga Valley. So where's the Erie Canal?
No, I mean, I got confused too. I was like, I didn't think the Erie Canal was here. And then it was like, no, this is totally separate. Just has a similar name.
Yeah, I can imagine the person being like, so where's the canal? This is the Ohio and Erie Canal. Right. Which one's the Ohio and which one's the Erie Canal?
Yeah.
No, this is the Ohio and Erie Canal.
That's like a park ranger's nightmare right there to have to answer that question over and over and over.
Oh my gosh. I know. It's awful.
Every park has a question that people always ask that you're just like, if I have to answer this question one more time, I'm going to go insane.
I know. It's like when you go to a store or a business that you can tell they're just fed up with that question because then they put Post-it notes with the answers like on the desk in front of you so you don't have to ask it.
Yeah.
Anyways, this brings us to fun fact number 2. Fun fact number 2. So they started the construction in 1825. After 7 years of hard work, the canal stretched 308 miles from Cleveland to Portsmouth on the Ohio River, and canal boats promised passengers that they could now travel between Cincinnati and Cleveland in as little as 80 hours, which to us sounds really long, but to them, that was weeks shorter than it would have been otherwise. But what that opportunity did was crazy because if you imagine the people at the time, they would have to load all their stuff up on a wagon, pulled it by mule up and over the mountains to try to get to a place where they could sell their stuff. But now there is a way that they can put everything really close onto a barge, basically a canal boat, and it could take it down to Cleveland, which could then go to Buffalo, then could go to Hudson River, and then to the Atlantic. And it could take so much less time. It was less expensive. And they could get a better price for all their goods because they could sell more of it. The more they sold, the better price they got. It was kind of incredible, but a couple quick, interesting facts. Most wagons could probably carry somewhere between 2,500 pounds and 6,000 pounds. A canal boat could carry 30 tons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And wagons...
Really? Because I feel like the canal is not that big. I mean, you see it. It goes through Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Right.
The Ohio and Erie Canal, not the Erie Canal.
Right.
Goes through Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and you can still see parts of it. And it's not all together anymore.
Right.
It's not functional or anything, but you can see parts of it up by the Canal Exploration Center is the best place to go to see it. But it's not that big.
No.
Or wide.
No. And it was designed to only be 4 feet deep.
How could you get that much weight on a barge in 4 feet of water?
So the canal boats, they're wide and they have a super flat bottom.
Right.
And so you would just load it up until it was just the right depth.
Basically. Like it's just like hovering like a half an inch above the bottom of the canal.
Probably. Yeah. And so that goes to show kind of like the amazing ingenuity of the canal system, because it had to be precise, had to be 4 feet deep almost exactly, so that all these boats could travel without a problem.
Interesting.
And so the canal boats can hold way more. The wagons would need usually between 4 and 6 mules to pull, especially if it was a heavier wagon. The canal boats, they would run 2 3-mule teams. While one mule team was pulling the canals, the other one was basically on the front of the canal boat taking a nap. And so they'd switch
them off
every 4 to 6 hours. That way, you could have your canal boat constantly in motion.
Right. You wouldn't have to rest like the wagons would have had to.
Exactly. And so that reduced time, and it was just so fast. You could pull so much more, so much faster. And in just almost every conceivable way, the canal system was better than what they had before. And it opened up Ohio in amazing ways, and probably in ways that the people who designed it never even imagined possible. And this brings me to fun fact number 3. Fun fact number 3 is that the Ohio and Erie Canal was so successful that by 1850, less than 20 years after it was completed, enough people saw opportunities in Ohio that they moved there and built their life there, and Ohio became the 3rd most populated state in the country.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's cool.
And it's all thanks to the canals.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it was at the time the edge of the frontier.
Right.
So it wouldn't have been very heavily populated.
No, definitely not.
Before that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's like I said, the sense of foreboding and realizing that once I cross those mountains, I'm pretty much on my own.
Right.
But once you have an interconnected system of transportation and people moving back and forth and information, then it's not so scary. And people are like, let's get out of here.
Right.
And let's go over there.
The 3rd most. That's crazy after all the people have been packed into the colonies.
Yes, exactly. I think that's I
would have been there. I like to think.
I think so.
Right?
You'd be a hardy frontier woman.
Yeah, I think I think so. It's hard when you hear stories like that, when, we live in Utah. There's a lot of movement that came through Utah when the West was being explored and stuff. And it's always like, I wonder if I would have had the gumption to go west. Like Dr. Quinn, medicine woman. I could have been Dr. Quinn. I think we all like to think that we could be those people.
Jane Seymour has a special place in my heart. And Sully, every boy that watched that show wanted to be Sully.
I know, John still wants a wolf.
I do.
But you know what I mean? Like, I think it's very romanticized now, but it's interesting to think back to what it actually probably felt like, which is like, you're going out there and we might not live very long if we do this.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can totally see myself, if I were to go to Ohio, I would wait until the canal. I probably would not have been one of the first people out there trying to grow stuff and get it, back to people.
Right.
Or anything. That sounds like a miserable existence. Thank you to those people. But I would have probably been the next wave saying, oh, now we have canals?
Exactly. Oh my gosh. It's so cool. It's so unique. And the canal system was so successful. It was like I said, created the opportunity for so many people to move there, but it was like the backbone of everything in the area for almost 80 years.
Okay.
And so it was a big deal. And I kind of hypothesized, like I talked a little bit earlier, was this really destined to happen? In a lot of ways, I kind of wonder if we hadn't have developed the technological advances to connect the frontier with the main section of the US. I wonder if we might have turned into something like Europe, where you have some nation states set up all over the place because, like the reason we fought the Revolutionary War, we didn't want to be governed by something so far away from us.
Right.
But the connectivity that the canal system gave the frontier allowed for kind of a cohesion within the US, within the culture of the US. And so it just made a segmented nation whole in some ways.
And to your point, I'm assuming we're going to talk about this pretty soon, but the other part of Cuyahoga Valley and its connectivity is the railroad.
Right. Yeah.
So Cuyahoga Valley, actually, like this national park and the history that runs through it is all about connectivity.
Yes.
Between the frontier and the colonies, basically.
Exactly.
Which is what I think is so cool, which is why we love this park, because you go there and you're like, what? There's a train that goes through here? And,
I know.
You know, all this stuff. So I won't steal your thunder, but it's just the more that we're talking about it, the more I'm like, that would have been a huge deal to not only have the canal going through here, but also the train and the railroad.
Yeah. And that's definitely our next stop on...
I see what you did there.
On this journey that we're taking here. So the canal system was super important. And I mentioned for 80 years, it was the backbone of the economy. Well, and it didn't even actually go out of use because the train came in and just took everything over because it was more efficient. The only reason the canal system really stopped being used was because there was a giant natural disaster in Ohio that basically destroyed the entire canal system.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What was it?
In 1913, there was a great flood. In March of 1913, for like several days, literally it rained cats and dogs.
Literally?
Literally. It literally rained buckets, I should say. Instead of
literally?
Literally. No, it just dropped so much water that 450 people died in these floods, and 250,000 people were left homeless because everything just washed away.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, and it did so much damage to the canal system that it was almost like they were going to have to start new.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Luckily, and luckily I say as a silver lining to a terrible situation, the first train started running through Cuyahoga Valley in 1880.
Okay, I was going to say, was the train already established? So they had been working side by side, the canal and the train.
Right.
And then when the canal went out of commission, basically, they were just like, let's just use the train.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah, exactly. And so the train pretty much easily picked up the rest of the slack that the canal system left. But there were still hundreds of thousands of people that their jobs relied on the canal system that were now suddenly unemployed.
Right.
And so it kind of created an interesting situation. This whole time period is so interesting because there's so much change happening so rapidly. Mm-hmm. And so you go from a pretty agrarian society, and then you add in this interconnected economy with the canal system. And then at the same time, the whole Western civilization, Europe, America, we're starting to industrialize. Mm-hmm. And then you have this flood in Ohio that suddenly creates this giant unemployment situation, while at the same time, industry is taking off like crazy. And so you have all these people that now we don't need the canals anymore, but we have a whole lot of manufacturing jobs. Or the people that are in Ohio are recognizing industry is taking off and we have all these amazing natural resources at our disposal. And so the coal industry took off like crazy. The steel and iron industry took off like crazy. And then the automobile industry was young, but it was taking off as well. And all of that started to be incorporated into the economy of Ohio. Yeah, the canals were gone, but once you lay down a train track, it's there and it's good to go. It's pretty low maintenance compared to maybe the canal system. And you can move things at so much greater speed and you can carry so much more. This period of time is a massive changing period in Ohio, but it had huge ramifications for the Cuyahoga Valley because Cleveland was such an important port city. And if you could move all of your goods, if you could get everything to Cleveland, then you could trade with the rest of the world.
And Cuyahoga Valley is so close to Cleveland.
Right.
Like, I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
So we just need to emphasize this again. Like, this is an urban park.
Yeah.
So it is within, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour from the main center of Cleveland. It's right there.
It's a huge deal. And the people that were running the trains realized that it's actually kind of downhill from Akron all the way to Cleveland. And so the trains that were going that direction through Cuyahoga Valley could actually carry a lot more than places where they had to go uphill.
Interesting.
And so this train line, this rail line was being used all the time. And it was a huge corridor for trade and of goods and everything like that. And Akron actually became a really important place for rubber products, is what they were building there. And so you had all of this industry that was building, and you had these trains. The trains in Ohio actually became so prevalent that even today, now in 2020, the last year that this data was available that I saw, Ohio has the third highest number of miles of railroad of any other state.
Interesting.
That's probably a weird way to say that. I probably don't know if I said that properly.
The third highest most railroads of any other state. I mean, I get it.
Yeah, I guess, okay, there's only 2 states that have more miles of railroad tracks, Texas and Illinois. And Ohio has 5,300 miles of railroad tracks that run through it.
Interesting.
And the rail line between Akron and Cleveland is so important. It's such a big deal.
And that literally cuts straight through the national park.
Right. Exactly.
Boom. Right through the middle.
Yes. And one of the reasons why the train was so beneficial, not just to these emerging industries, but even to existing industries like the agriculture, because there's so much in agriculture that is time sensitive. And so with the canal system, you couldn't transport milk. And you couldn't transport things that like raw meat that would go bad before it even arrived at the port city. But with the trains, suddenly you don't have to change your milk into cheese to transport it. You can just transport the milk and you can transport all kinds of agricultural products and sell them. And it's just suddenly so many opportunities are available and everything is becoming profitable here. But that takes us into a different chapter of Cuyahoga Valley.
Yeah. This part is so cool, though. Like, it's sad, but it's cool.
Yes. Now, I have a rule, and I'll share this rule with everybody listening. It's called Hanlon's Razor, is what this rule is called.
Did you name it?
I did not name it.
Else?
So I just want to make sure that people know.
I've literally never heard this rule before.
Yes. I use this rule because it helps me to look back at the past and not be so critical. The rule is this: don't assign malice to what can be adequately explained by neglect, ignorance, or incompetence. When you look back and you see the things that you're seeing through our modern lens, don't always just assign bad intent to what they're doing.
They were not in the same mind as we are today.
Right.
The environmental movement, and we talk about this. We actually talk about this very heavily when we talked about Yosemite.
Yeah.
But a lot of national parks kind of went through this because that was what was happening at the time in the United States, was like, we haven't thought about this before.
Right. Exactly.
But maybe like we're seeing these trees or we're seeing these mountains and we're thinking, maybe we should do something different with this area. But it was not just like, it's not like now where it's like everybody wants to protect everything.
Right.
And, if it has any type of value in any type of way, like there are people out there that are just like, everything has to be protected, you know?
Right.
And we're used to that, I guess, cause going forth.
Right.
We're pretty used to that these days.
Yeah, exactly.
But back then, that was not a thing.
Well,
and so we have to remember that, like, as we're talking about this, especially, it's like they weren't thinking about preserving and protecting. They were trying to survive, which puts you in a totally different mindset. We have the luxury of thinking about preserving and protecting.
Right, exactly.
But they really didn't. Like, as we talked about the canal and the train and stuff, like people are just trying to carve out a life. They're just trying to stay alive.
Exactly.
It's totally different when you look at it through that lens, because it's like nobody was doing this on purpose, really.
And so much of this was so new.
Yeah.
Like these industries that are making, I don't know, tires or whatever, if they're building glass products or pottery or things like that. You have all these manufacturing factories and things like that are popping up through Ohio, and they're making amazing things that are actually improving the lives of so many people by creating cheap products that are doing great things for people. But when you're manufacturing all these things, there's also byproducts. And they didn't know what to do with those byproducts or what the problem was with out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And so a lot of these companies and businesses and factories, they're like, we've got all this stuff. What should we do with it? I don't know. Toss it in the river.
Put it in the river and it will take it away.
And especially because the river empties into Lake Erie, which is huge.
Right.
And so a lot of these people are thinking, dude, Lake Erie is huge. Nobody's going to even notice that we're putting this stuff into the lake. And so you have all of these industries that are now putting stuff into rivers and putting stuff into lakes. And, you know, they're doing things now that we recognize is called polluting.
Right.
But
we don't do that anymore. Hopefully. Well, we do still do that.
Yeah, they're still polluting.
But we don't dump byproducts into the rivers in the national parks.
Right. Exactly.
So we've come a long way. We're just
yes. But we can't impose our current knowledge set and ethics onto what was happening back then, because this was all so new that they were just like, I don't know what to do with this, so we'll muddle through this. Cringe through this.
It makes me cringe.
It does make us cringe.
But I remember when I first heard this story that I'm sure you're going to tell about this river, it's just like, what? Awful.
Yes.
But it does help to have the historical context around it.
Yes, exactly. And so, like I said before, in my view, I'm not assigning malice or bad intent to these people. They were just doing the best that they thought they could, or best that they knew how. And they were disposing of a lot of these products in the river, or a lot of these byproducts into the river, in the Cuyahoga River. And a lot of
it goes through what is now Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Right. And that ended up in Lake Erie. Now, at the mouth of the Cuyahoga River, where it opens up into Lake Erie, this is down by Cleveland, there was a railroad bridge that went over the river right there. And there was a lot of debris that was kind of gathering at the base of this bridge and at the mouth of the river. And it was building up trees and things like that. Well, also, a lot of the byproducts, a lot of the oil, maybe from the rubber plant and things like that, a lot of the oils and things like that were ending up on this debris. And as a train went over the bridge, some sparks flew from the wheels of this train and landed on this pile of debris. And it lit on fire. Within like 25 minutes or so, the fire was out. And most people in Cleveland didn't even care. They didn't even think anything of it.
Like, your river literally lit on fire.
I'm going to get to that. So yes, there was like a film of oil like on the water and everything like that from all this oil and everything that was being put in the river, and it lit on fire. But they put it out. And so, not a big deal. Nationwide, however, a lot of things like this were starting to happen. And in California, that same year, there was a giant oil spill that people in California were like, oh my gosh, our beaches, all the wildlife, so much is, all this is happening. And even like a few years earlier, Lake Erie had been basically declared a dead lake because there was so much in there. And things like this were happening all over the country. There were little things here and there, but it wasn't until the oil spill in California and then this image popped up on people's radar. A fire on a river? Oh my gosh. And so Time Magazine actually sent a reporter to Cleveland to get more information about this. And he realized people in Cleveland don't even think this is a big deal because, and this is fun fact number 4, the Cuyahoga River had lit on fire at least 10 times. And as early as 1868.
Oh my gosh, they're like, it's fine. It happens all the time.
This is like, why are you guys making a big deal about this? But the rest of the nation is like, water and fire do not go together. They do not mix well. And so
you're like, has nobody thought that maybe the river should not be able to light on fire? Just asking.
I can just imagine like young kids being like, are rivers not supposed to light on fire? What? Does that make sense? Am I supposed to be able to...
Your river doesn't light on fire?
And so suddenly this nationwide environmental movement now has like this amazing contradiction, this image of a living contradiction, a river on fire that is now like a massive passion point. People have this image that is so powerful now that it really helps to push this environmental movement forward. Like, guys, something's wrong here.
Right.
We've got to figure this out. Our rivers are dead. Our lakes are dead. Our rivers are on fire. We can't eat anything out of these lakes and rivers anymore. It's like, we got to figure something out. And so even though like to a lot of locals, this wasn't a big deal, it actually was one of the best catalysts for pushing the environmental movement to the point where it could actually achieve some big things. And some of these big achievements were like the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. So we're laying down the groundwork for an environmental ethic that is different from the original environmental movement. The original environmental movement, with the creation of national parks like Yosemite and things like that, is we want to conserve some of the most beautiful things out there and preserve and protect them so people can enjoy them. But this new environmental movement was much more local.
Yeah. And active, probably.
Yes.
Where it's like, we can't just set this aside and say, let's keep it pretty.
Right.
It's like we have to actually continually make choices that are going to keep this or clean this up.
Exactly.
And keep it pretty.
Dr. Seuss actually kind of weighed in on this. I don't know if you knew this.
In one of his books?
In one of his books. Actually, the Lorax. The original Lorax.
I totally forgot about that book. Yeah.
But actually,
makes sense.
The current version of the Lorax is different from the original one.
In the original one, the river lights on fire and the Lorax gets sad.
And all the woodland creatures flee, lit on fire and everything like that. It's actually kind of traumatizing.
I should not
for
be
young
laughing.
children.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. I can see why he changed it.
Yes, actually. So the Time magazine article described the Cuyahoga River as oozing rather than flowing. And it said that a person does not drown in the Cuyahoga River. People decay in the Cuyahoga River. So in the Lorax, Dr. Seuss includes the following line referring to the fish. They will walk on their fins and get woefully weary in search of some water that isn't so smeary. I hear things are just as bad in Lake Erie. Yeah.
Wait, but you said it's not like that anymore?
They took it out. As conditions improved,
they took it out.
They took it out so that they weren't like slandering Lake Erie anymore.
Interesting.
But actually, I mean, it had a big impact. All of these things kind of came together to improve things greatly. So we listened to a podcast recently on Love Canal, which was another environmental hotspot where it's all about local people, where they're living, things like that. This was happening all over the country. And honestly, I think the Cuyahoga River fire was only a small blip in what happened, but
it lit a fire under their bums.
I'm trying not to use like a lit their fire.
It lit a fire under their bums. They're like, our river should not be in flames. Let's do something about it.
Yeah.
And they did. And that's what makes it cool. Because now when you go to Cuyahoga Valley, one of our favorite spots is the Beaver Marsh. And you can go over there and see all types of animals hanging out in that river.
Yeah.
And my kids just love standing there and looking for turtles. There's birds everywhere. Like there are animals in that river now, which is just, I think, it's a cool story because you can see what it used to be. You can hear about what it used to be. And then you can go and you can stand there and you can be like, life finds a way.
Yeah. And
after we clean it up.
yes, exactly. And after, you'd be surprised. Some efforts into it actually had amazing benefits. And the beavers were actually gone from that area for like 150 years.
And now that they're back, they're bionic, which is super cool.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
from drinking the radioactive waste.
Yeah, exactly. And
I'm just kidding. They're regular beavers.
Yeah. And that beaver marsh beforehand, it used to be like an auto parts repair shop. There was lots of pollution. There was lots of garbage there, but they cleaned it up and the beavers came back and now it's one of the best parts of the park.
Yeah, we love that area of the park. It's pretty cool. So all around a neat story.
Yeah. And so now finally, to kind of round everything off, let's jump to fun fact number 5, because just like I mentioned at the beginning, this place is so peaceful. It finds a way to return back to its peaceful, natural setting. When the glaciers came through in the Ice Age, it found its way back to like this perfect natural setting. Nothing happened there for such a long time, but when something does, it finds its way back. And I think one of the coolest things about this park is that they continually invest in returning back to that peaceful cultural heritage to help people realize how important this place was. Fun fact number 5 is that Cuyahoga Valley National Park actually has a countryside initiative program where they actually support farms inside the national park boundary itself. They realized while they were fixing up the river and fixing up the canals and everything like that, they had a whole bunch of dilapidated, old, used up farms all throughout the national park. So this countryside initiative, their goal was basically to restore a lot of these lands. And then best of them, what they were going to do was they were going to restore them and put them back into use so that people could come here and see what it was like during the early 1800s. And to see what an organic farm or what a settler or a homestead actually did look like. There's actually 10 active farms within the national park boundaries right now.
That's cool.
And it's really neat.
I know of a few. I didn't know there were 10 though.
Yeah, and they're even open to putting a few more farms on some of these older farm areas that haven't been used yet. And so as you look at the map that they give you, when you enter the park and stuff like that, you'll see that there's a berry farm, there's a sheep farm, there's a vineyard, and there's several family farms and farmsteads where they grow natural things, and you can actually visit the farms often and you can buy their products. And on the sheep farm, they have a sheepdog competition.
Cool. We love those.
Yeah, I love sheepdog competitions. It's super fun. At the vineyard, there's a restaurant and you can have events there. And on one of the family farms, you can go to like a corn maze and they have some really fun autumn activities. But it's really just all of this is to support and celebrate the era of homesteading and settling here in Ohio. And especially here in Cuyahoga Valley, to celebrate that cultural heritage. We've already celebrated the canal system. We've celebrated the railroad system, which are both incredibly unique to this specific national park. And now we're going to try and bring it back a little bit to a time that's a little bit simpler, to a time where people were living off the land, they were self-sufficient, and growing beautiful and tasty things on the land itself. And so it's just really a unique thing. We've visited other national parks where they have maybe something small, but nothing to this scale.
Yeah, I didn't know they had that many. That's cool.
It's really cool. And so this park, like I said before, it's almost unchanging, but when something does change, it finds its way back. And so we're coming back to a simpler way of life when you enter Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And it's super cool. We're celebrating some really neat things here in this park. And I just love it.
Yeah, I hope everyone gets to visit at some point. It's very unique. It's very different than a lot of the other experiences you'll have in national parks. But it's quickly become a favorite for us because there's so much variety in what you can do. And it's a totally different experience. You learn a lot. It's a lot of learning and introspection. And like you said, like peace. It feels really peaceful there. Waterfalls, forests, cool hiking trails, but a really solid and like fascinating human history. So for your task for this week, head over to the Dirt in My Shoes Facebook or Instagram page, and we want to know what fun fact you found the most fascinating. Which one surprised you the most? And we can have a fun little discussion about that over there on the socials. So we want to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to the Exploring the National Parks podcast. If you enjoy these episodes, please leave us a 5-star review. And we will see you next week, same time, same place.